The number hit me before the story did. 250,000. 250,000 children. No parents, no last names, no birth certificates, no records of where they came from or who they belonged to, loaded onto trains between 1854 and 1929 and shipped across America like freight, distributed to strangers in 47 states. And somehow this is a footnote in history books, not a chapter. I found it while pulling threads on the 1890 census destruction, searching for what else vanished during that same window of time. One record gap led to another, which led to a name I'd never encountered in any classroom. The Orphan Trains, the largest mass relocation of children in American history, a 75-year program that moved 250,000 human beings across a continent. And most people have never heard of it. That alone should bother you. But what bothered me more was the math. The official story goes like this. In the 1850s, eastern cities were overwhelmed by immigration. Families poured in from Europe, crammed into tenement housing, and when parents succumbed to disease, poverty, or addiction, their children ended up on the streets. New York City alone had an estimated 10,000 to 30,000 homeless children by 1850. A Yale-educated minister named Charles Luring Brace saw these children sleeping in alleyways, forming gangs for protection, getting arrested and thrown into adult prisons as young as 5 years old, and he decided to act. In 1853, he founded the Children's Aid Society. His solution was simple. Take these children out of the city, put them on trains, send them to wholesome farming families in the Midwest who needed labor and could provide moral upbringing. The first train left New York on October 1st, 1854, carrying 46 children to Dwag, Michigan. By the end of the week, all 46 had been placed with families. The program expanded. Other organizations joined. The New York Foundling Hospital, the American Female Guardian Society, over 20 separate agencies eventually participated. And for 75 years, the trains kept running. Now, here's where I'll be fair to the official narrative. Many children did land in loving homes. 2 orphan train riders went on to become state governors, Andrew Burke of North Dakota and John Brady of Alaska. A 1910 survey claimed 87% of placements were successful. Charles Luring Brace genuinely believed he was saving lives, and in many cases, he probably was. I don't dispute that. What I dispute is the scale. What I dispute is the origin. What I dispute is the silence surrounding the parts of this story that don't fit. Let's start with the numbers. New York City's total population in 1850 was approximately 500,000 people. The claim is that 10,000 to 30,000 of them were homeless children. That's anywhere from 2 to 6% of the entire city, consisting of parentless children. By the 1870s, despite the establishment of orphanages, charitable organizations, settlement houses, and the Children's Aid Society itself working around the clock, the number of homeless children grew to between 20,000 and 30,000. The programs weren't reducing the problem. The supply of parentless children kept increasing. Where were the parents? Immigration records exist. Ship manifests exist. Ellis Island processed families together, not unaccompanied minors, by the tens of thousands. If these children arrived in America with families, something happened to those families after arrival. Something so widespread and so thorough that it produced 250,000 children whose origins couldn't be traced over the course of 7 decades. And here's what no one explains. If you add in the British Home Children Program, which ran from 1869 to 1948 and relocated over 100,000 children from the United Kingdom to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa under nearly identical conditions, the number climbs past 350,000. Same decades, same methods, same pattern of children labeled as orphans, even though 2/3 of the British children had at least one living parent. Same untraceable origins, same sealed records, 2 parallel programs on 2 continents producing the same result at the same time. That's not poverty. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern. And patterns demand explanation. But the explanations don't come because the records don't exist. The National Orphan Train Complex in Concordia, Kansas, the primary museum and research center dedicated to this history, maintains a database of just over 8,000 confirmed riders out of 250,000. That's roughly 3%. The New York Foundling Hospital, which sent out an estimated 100,000 children on its own, has records described by researchers as practically non-existent for trains and riders. Many organizations kept no standardized records at all. Children were pulled directly off streets with no documentation of their family origins. Names were changed upon placement, sometimes multiple times. The Children's Aid Society and the Foundling Hospital still keep their archives restricted. Descendants who contact them receive, and I'm quoting their own policy here, non-identifying information in the form of a letter. No copies of documents are provided. 250,000 children moved across a continent. 97% of them have incomplete, missing, sealed, or destroyed records in a nation that was simultaneously building the most comprehensive census system in the world. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Speaking of a census, the 1890 census was the most detailed population survey the United States had ever conducted. For the first time, each family received its own dedicated form. It collected information on immigration status, naturalization, English language proficiency, home ownership, race, household composition, and the relationship of every individual to the head of household. It captured a nation of 63 million people during the exact peak of the Orphan Train era. The highest placement rates occurred between 1882 and 1892. Nearly half of all children sent to Minnesota alone arrived in that single decade. The 1890 census would have documented precisely where these children were living, who they were living with, and whether their stated origins matched any verifiable immigration record. That census was destroyed. A fire on January 10th, 1921, in the basement of the Commerce Department building damaged or destroyed the population schedules. About 25% burned outright. Another 50% sustained water and smoke damage. The Census Bureau estimated it would take 2 to 3 years to copy and salvage what remained. They never started. The damage record sat in warehouse storage for 12 years, untouched, deteriorating. Then in December 1932, the chief clerk of the Census Bureau quietly added the surviving 1890 schedules to a routine list of papers approved for destruction. Congress authorized it on February 23, 1933. The very next day, they laid the cornerstone for the new National Archives building. Of the 63 million people enumerated, only about 6,300 entries survive today. And this was the first census for which the government discontinued the practice of filing backup copies at local offices. No backups, no copies, no redundancy. For the single most genealogically valuable census ever taken, covering the exact years when 250,000 unidentified children were being redistributed across the country, the pattern repeats with unsettling precision. But let me tell you about the part that still keeps me up at night, the display. When trains arrived at their destination towns, the children were taken to chorus, opera houses, church halls, or railroad platforms. Advance flyers have been posted in local newspapers. Homes for children wanted, and the children were put on stage. They were made to stand in lines. They gave their names, sang songs, recited little performances, and then the townspeople selected them. According to Sarah Jane Richter, a professor of history at Oklahoma Panhandle State University, people came along and prodded them and looked and felt and saw how many teeth they had. Orphan train rider Stanley Cornell described it in his own words. We'd stop in these little towns and get out of trains, and they'd interview us. It was kind of like a cattle auction. Some ordered boys, others girls, some preferred light babies, others dark, reported the Daily Independent of Grand Island, Nebraska in May of 1912. A woman in Burlington, Iowa, told a reporter in 1889 that she wanted a particular boy because he has his hair combed. Siblings were separated routinely. Brothers watched sisters get chosen by different families. Then the unchosen children got back on the train and rode to the next town, and the next until someone picked them or the line ran out. Many never saw their families again. The phrase put up for adoption comes from this era. Literally, children put up on platforms for selection, and when they arrived at their new homes, the erasure was completed. Ryder Alice, they said in 1996, I was one of the luckier ones because I know my heritage. They took away the identity of the younger riders by not allowing contact with the past. Names changed, histories erased, origins forbidden. Children told to forget everything before the train, told their old life didn't exist anymore. I found one account from a writer who was sent back 3 times. 3 different families rejected him before a fourth kept him. Not because anything was wrong with him, because he was too small for farm work. That's what they wanted, labor. The legal documents didn't even use the word adoption. They used the word indenture, the same word used for contracted servitude. Abolitionists at the time saw exactly what was happening and called the platform displays slave auctions. Catholic leaders in Boston accused the Children's Aid Society, a Protestant organization, of systematically removing Catholic immigrant children to convert them to Protestantism. Reverend George Haskins, speaking for the Bishop of Boston, accused them of selling children body and soul to farmers. These weren't fringe accusations. These were public charges made in newspapers and congressional hearings. But the trains kept running. And here's what connects it to the broader pattern I keep finding. October 8th, 1871. One night, multiple catastrophic fires ignited simultaneously across the Great Lakes region. The Great Chicago Fire destroyed 2,100 acres, leveled 17,400 buildings, and left 70,000 people homeless. That same night, 200 miles north, the Pestigo Fire in Wisconsin consumed 1.2 million acres and took between 1,500 and 2,500 lives, making it the single most devastating wildfire in recorded American history. Simultaneously, fires destroyed Holland, Michigan, Manistee, Michigan, Port Huron, Michigan. 37 individual fire areas across 3 states, all on the same night. The official explanation is drought conditions and careless land clearing practices that happened to ignite at the same time across hundreds of miles. One night, the decade immediately following those fires, 1882 to 1892, was a peak decade of orphan train placements. The fires created massive displacement. Entire communities vanished. Local records burned. Population records, birth certificates, property deeds, church registries, all consumed. And into that void, children with no traceable origins flooded the system by the thousands. At the same time, something else was happening at World's Fairs and amusement parks that I still can't fully explain. Between 1896 and 1943, premature infants were displayed in glass incubators as public attractions. A man named Martin Cooney, who may not have been a real doctor, who changed his name at least once, who lied about his birthplace, operated what he called Infantorum at Coney Island's Luna Park, and at World's Fairs in Omaha, Buffalo, Chicago, and New York. Signs outside reading babies in incubators. Visitors paid 25 cents to view rows of tiny infants behind glass. Cooney claimed to have treated over 6,500 premature babies. The names of the infants were kept anonymous. Hospitals at the time refused to treat premature babies at all, calling them weaklings unfit to survive. Eugenics exhibits ran at the same fairs where Cooney displayed his incubators. Where did thousands of anonymous premature infants come from? Who were their parents? Why was there such an endless supply of them across decades of exhibitions? And why does nobody ask? I keep coming back to the children. Not the theories, not the timelines. The children, real human beings who rode those trains without knowing where they were going, who stood on platforms while strangers inspected their teeth, who had their names taken away and their histories sealed in archives that remain closed more than a century later. An estimated 2 to 3 million Americans alive today are direct descendants of orphan train riders, and most of them carry a gap in their family tree that can never be filled, not because the information was lost accidentally because it was never recorded, or because it was recorded and then sealed, or because the one census that would have captured all was destroyed and never restored when restoration was still possible. I spent weeks looking for a single definitive document that explains where all these children came from. A government report, a comprehensive study, an internal audit from any of the 20 organizations that ran these trains. Something that says, here's the accounting, here are the origins, here's the verified chain of custody for 250,000 human lives. It doesn't exist. The closest thing is a series of annual reports from the Children's Aid Society claiming general success without providing verifiable source data for the children's backgrounds. The organizations didn't communicate their statistics with each other. Many never published their numbers at all. And over the 90 years since the last train ran, records have been lost, destroyed, or sealed behind institutional walls that remain closed to this day. Maybe it was just poverty. Maybe the immigration waves really did produce 250,000 parentless children over 75 years. Maybe the record gaps are nothing more than 19th century bureaucratic sloppiness. Maybe the simultaneous fires, the destroyed census, the sealed archives, the parallel programs in Britain, the incubator babies at World's Fairs. Maybe all of it is just coincidence layered on coincidence. Layered on coincidence. But I've been researching this long enough to know what coincidence looks like. And I know what pattern looks like. 250,000 children with no verifiable origins. Records that are missing, sealed, or destroyed at every turn. A census that captured their existence wiped from the historical record. A timeline that aligns precisely with the disappearance of entire civilizations from maps and the systematic destruction of cities by fire. Identity erasure is so thorough that descendants with DNA testing still can't trace their lineages past the train platform. Not coincidence pattern. And when you see the pattern, the question isn't whether something happened. The question is what? What generated 250,000 children with no parents in the most documented era of American history? What required their redistribution across an entire continent? What is still being protected by sealed archives? Under 70 years after the first train left the station, the records won't tell you. The institutions won't tell you. The history books barely mention it happened at all. But the descendants are still here. 2 to 3 million of them carrying questions in their bloodlines that nobody in authority has ever been willing to answer. The children remember even if history pretends they were never here at.